Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the organizers and the wonderful hospitality. I want to address a particular set of issues, and they're mostly negatives. But in the negatives, there are always blanks, and the hope is that where power cannot reach, that something good, positive might be happening. And so one way of framing what I'm going to do, and I would like to invite you to think a bit in an abstract mode, because once I enter the actual subject, it becomes very concrete. So this is a moment to be a bit abstract and, in fact, to think of many diverse instantiations of the particularity I'm addressing. So the notion is when the digital actually exits its domain and enters a very material world. And in that process, becomes extractive, just like mining. We really do not tend to think of the digital and mining as being cousins. I want to emphasize those moments when they actually are. And what marks the mine is that once you have extracted, you really don't care what happens. And that is quite different, say, from mass consumption firms, which always want, the sons and daughters to be better than the fathers and the mothers, than the parents. So where there is a kind of an interest in maximizing capacity, say, to spend in that case. Extractive does not have that burden. Once it gets it, it's out of there. Now, one way of framing this, to give it a bit of a sort of dramatic turn, is to ask, what is the steam engine of our epoch? Now, the steam engine was not that which changed everything, but it was that which enabled a new ordering. So that's an important distinction here. In there also hangs a question: how do complex systems change? And in a way, we are experiencing a change of a complex system in the last 30 years, I would say. Two major forces come together. The real, I don't like to call it neoliberalism, I think it's a totally overused term, but a certain kind of mode of economic organization which has privileged certain actors and destroyed many others. And at the same time, the rise of these technologies at a level, they are sort of almost everywhere. So for me, a key issue here in a lot of my work is that my answer to the question, how do complex systems change, is they don't change by changing everything. What actually is often dominant is the shift of existing capabilities from one organizational mode to another organizational mode. So when we privatize and deregulate and globalize, we did not throw everything out of the window that was there before, the national sort of sovereign economy concept. We just took some of those capabilities but inserted them in very different logics. So these are sort of background elements to situate, if you want, what I want to say. Now, when I ask this question, what is the steam engine of our epoch? The typical answer is, of course, these digital technologies. And sort of, this is a bit of a brutal estimate on my part, a bit elementary, a bit sort of, who knows out of where. I think they actually were in the 80s and in the 90s. I don't think they are today. In my reading, what has happened is that one of the dominant forms, that which can really change and has changed things, is another kind of capability that has been able to extract the most. Maybe it can be compared with what a certain kind of scientist can also do with these technologies, and put it into its organizing logic, its extractive notions, and that is high finance. And here we need to clarify that finance is really very different from traditional banking. A simple way of describing it, the traditional bank sells something it has, money, for an interest, for a payment. It's commerce. Nothing wrong with that. We all need that, etc., etc. Finance sells something it does not have. And in selling what it does not have lies both its brilliance. It has to invent instruments to invade other sectors. And there also lies the fact that it is extractive. It invades other sectors and it extracts something. And one way of understanding finance is, and to see how these digital technologies have allowed it to scale up in ways that are absolutely unbelievable, is to sort of look at this curve. This is just one little element. It's a famous instrument, some of you might know about it. But the point here is the growth curve. That is 6 years. So in the 201 is under a trillion. Now, I know that we use the zeros a bit differently in Europe, but they're all on the right side, okay? They're working zero, so to say. And 6 years later, 62 trillion. That's a very rapid rate of growth. I have tried to understand, are there other sectors that have that capacity? It's like almost a vertical curve. And I can't find one. But there probably is something, and it probably has to do with some of the sectors that we discussed this morning in the digital in the digital world. Now, when I confront these numbers, I'm continuously working on these kinds of super numbers. I must immediately interpolate these numbers, ask them, what is 62 trillion? What does that mean? Well, at that point in our world, at that point in time, those 62 trillion were more than global GDP, which was 54 trillion. Little difference, but it's just a datum, okay? And I asked a whole variety of questions. I don't have time to do that now. But one question I asked, well, if that is just one instrument of finance, what was the total value of finance in 2007? In the whole world, etc., all the instruments. Well, that was 600 trillion. Now, we've left money, you understand. This is no longer money. This is a capability. This could not have happened without these digital technologies. These are scale-ups that are extraordinary. And today, it's over a quadrillion. And, again, when you compare it to some standard measures like global GDP, etc., I also ask, when I interrogate these numbers, I ask myself, well, okay, what's the value of all the currencies issued by all the central banks in the world? In other words, not the Bitcoin, not the this, just the official currencies of countries that have central banks that issue recognized currencies. And at that point, it was something like 200 trillion. So we are talking about orders of magnitude that we keep measuring in terms of numbers. And I think anybody who has done work on digital capabilities knows what that feels like, right? And then there is this other thing that you cannot flatten into numbers. So when I say that finance, and this is just, I repeat, one bit of finance, that high finance is actually the steam engine of our epoch, I'm talking about a capability. I really think of finance as a capability. And I don't buy the Amartya Sen, exclusively positive interpretation of the notion of capability. Capability is a very useful term, and I really don't like that, at least in the English language, it has a strong positive slant. I have studied capabilities at time 1 were benign and positive even, time 2 they are not at all. So this notion of a capability, the way I'm using it, is just a capability. It's neutral. One would have to establish, is it positive or negative? But so looking at finance as a capability, and so I want to give you a few examples of it as capability. I repeat, embedded in that capability, strategic, critical, and essential are the new technologies. They have known how to push the technology, since it appeared. They have been leaders in pushing. I remember way back in the 1980s, when some of these technologies actually begin to be developed, the scientists are the ones using it mostly, that financiers were already. And that is also, by the way, something that is often misunderstood. High finance has nothing to do with microeconomics. High finance is algorithmic math. And so the back room is the room where the secretaries usually sit, of all these banks. They have like 100 physicists developing instruments, beautiful minds, beautiful instruments. Pity is that they're designed to invade all kinds of sectors and extract what is there to be extracted. And I repeat, just like mining, once you have extracted, you're out of there. You don't care anymore. Now, I want to give you a couple of issues that have emerged. When Bernanke, our former head of the central bank, steps down, he makes a big speech. This was mid-2014. Makes a big speech, all the good things, and the this and the that. And then he ends with, we have two intractables, two conditions we cannot understand, we cannot track on. One of them, I'm quoting him, are the dark pools in finance. I love that language. There's language that I could have invented, and when I talk like that to some people who know me, they assume I invented that term, so now I clarify. No, it's not mine. It's comes from the business, so to say. And he said, right now, up to 70% of financial trading takes place in dark pools of finance. These are privately owned networks. There you see the numbers, Europe, etc., the US, and up to 70% of financial trading, that's a lot. And they are totally private. They have borders where no coyote or whatever we call him, the trafficker can take you over those borders. They're absolutely tight. There are long lists of banks waiting to gain access. So this is a digital world inside a digital world that has a rather clear project. One can almost say there is a lot of innovating. They have to invent these instruments. They become more and more powerful instruments, more and more brilliant minds. Some of these instruments take. I have colleagues at Columbia who do this kind of stuff. 16 complicated steps. How you build it up? You actually build it. You build the algorithm, and just like the physicists who are doing interstellar space are doing. And but all of that. It's just about accumulating accumulating is too good a word. It's just sort of building up concentrations of wealth. And in my reading, this is a bit of a footnote, I developed this in my latest book, which I gently called Expulsions. I can't remember the name in German, whatever the word in German is. But this is something that really has to do with concentrations of wealth. And when people talk about the top 1%, the elites, I see predatory formations. This is way beyond individuals. And I think some of the discussions that I heard today also about the digital, you cannot reduce it to people. These are very complex, new types of formations. They're assemblages of elements. We might be familiar with each element in that assemblage, may resonate in one way or another, but what actually comes out then has a certain measure of autonomy. These algorithms, especially when you don't even have people in there, right? The hyper. So again, the image that I want to leave you with, these are worlds inside worlds inside worlds. It's not, this kind of schema. Now, this is the second issue that, and here it's when finance enters just terrain, ground. The second issue that isn't intractable, according to the former head of the Central Bank of the United States. And he said up to 14 million households, that's between 30 and 50 million people, possibly, will have lost their homes by the end of 2014 in a very short, I add this, in a very short history of 7 years. Now, this extracting of whatever they extracted that produced the eviction of all these people, that is a brilliant instrument with devastating effects on those people, which produced a lot of wealth. Every time one of these, I'll give you the details in a second, every time one of these was achieved, somebody made money. The crisis that eventually hits is an accumulation of errors, those who hang on to it, and fear. You know, these irony, if there's an irony in this, the irony is that these very modest households, 14 million households, their failure created fear in the financial system because they said, oh my God, where is the venom here? And they had taken bits and pieces of these houses, built them as assets in order to generate an asset-backed security, which is what the high investment circuit wanted. They said, enough of derivatives based on derivatives, blah, blah, give me an asset-backed security. They abused these households. This is established. This instrument has been declared illegal. By the way, Germany ranks very high now. An invisible story. I'm sure most of you do not know that. You have well over 1 million households that have been victims of this and that are out of their homes. 1 million households, you know, could be 4 million people. That's very little in a big country like yours. But it has invaded India, it has invaded China. So we're talking about a brilliant instrument that has, you know, quite negative consequences. Now, I also want to call forth here the difficulty of capturing. This is an issue that I really have worked with very hard. The difficulty of capturing certain kinds of materiality. I've only 5 minutes left? Wowee. Okay. Certain types of materiality. And how it sort of becomes quite intractable. So this is 14 million households, as I said, up to 40 million people. It's invisible. We can't see that. We cannot see. Number one, we cannot see with our eyes 50 million, 40 million people. We can't see that. It's terribly material, but we cannot see that. And there is a lot, these abandoned houses, you could go and look at them. They're there. But basically, they are invisible. Very few people go there. They go if they're anthropologists or if they are activists, you know, whatever. So, so I have to move on. So here are some of the figures, blah, blah. I'm not going to dwell on this. Here is the figures on Germany. And this goes on, by the way, every year. These are households. So now we're way up. Germany is among the high ones. Hungary, Latvia are among very, very high ones. That's tragic right there. In Germany, it's a little wrinkle, but it tells you something. Now, so the outcome is empty urban land. And here is another study that I'm doing now, which is the top 100 cities that are the objects of desire of the major sort of investors in this type of stuff. And all these properties function in two circuits. One is the actual operational circuit of the property. And there what we notice is severe underutilization. There is no strong utility function. So my interpretation, quick sort of dirty reading, I can't elaborate, this is about buying urban land. It has nothing to do with the buildings. Other times, there have been times when this has happened, but there was a strong utility function. When I did my global city book, strong utility function in all that buy. Not here. The higher circuit, it's financializing an asset. These are great assets. And that is really the one that counts. And this is when you just look at those are, by the way, I should have said, these are just acquisitions of property, just buying property, and just for 1 year, every year. This is London. By the way, just as an indication of the power of money, a fairly abstract power, and the materiality of ground. I love this, by the way, this one. The Qatari royals now own more of central London than the Queen of England. Clearly, neither of those two one needs to worry about. It's sort of a nice, ironic little twist. Now, the thing that I want to emphasize is low utility function in the buying of those buildings. It's an investment. It's storing house. Here you see underutilization. These are famous cases. I'm just going to run through this. Here's the values. Now, what I put in italics investment, we are talking about properties that are not just simply, most properties in the whole world are existing on this level. And then there are some properties that also exist in a completely separate circuit where they are just being transacted. You can change property every minute if you want it, because they have been financialized, they have been digitized, basically. Those cities account 10% of the population, 76% of property investment. Now, I emphasize, it's just those that are in that circuit. This is a financial world. This has nothing to do with properties in the world, you know, all the properties. Saville, these are not my figures, Saville estimates that worldwide, real estate assets are nearly 60% of the value of all global assets, including equities, bonds, and gold. Mind you, derivatives are not there. You understand that finance is measured mostly in terms of derivatives. That's 217 trillion. That's more than global GDP, more or less. So we are, now this world can only exist, that this valuation and that prior valuation of 76% of property investment can only exist because of digital technology. It is absolutely dependent on that. There is no way it could do that without. And my question is always, if this is a sector that has been able to transform the world to the extent that it has with these technologies, you know, how can we transform the world? So beyond the question of how do we contest or govern Googles and the this and that, you know, how can we remake? There is so work to be done, so much work to be done in remaking. Now, I want to conclude now. Clearly, I'm running out of time. Are we dealing with the new systemics? I call this new systemics a logic of extraction. I think of Google. Okay, now they're doing a car, you know, but they're mostly extractive, we know that. Facebook, extractive. We tend to think that extractive needs to be material. No, it doesn't. I want to just point very quickly to these curves. And here what we're seeing is some gain incredibly, including after the crisis, even higher curve of growth, and others, of course, invisible on this graph, they don't show here, lose. So what I want to point out here is that so it grows, 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 then comes the crisis, which lasts about 2 hours here. I exaggerate, it was a bit more than that. And after the crisis, it's higher. You understand? Well, the rest are, you know, about 50% is suffering, you know, for households, whatever. And here, when it comes to assets, it barely shows. It like lasted half an hour. Every time it was a few years. But so one way of thinking about it, we are dealing with this kind of model. And so it also tells us that standard measures that we have are useless. GDP per capita only tells you something that you can work with as an objective condition. If growth happens in the big middle, not the little middle, the big middle, in other words, the fairly rich middle classes and the fairly poor working classes, and in between the rest. We have growth that is like this now. We are growing a lot of jobs. In the United States, we're proud of all the jobs that we have created, but 65% of all the jobs lost before the crisis, but when the crisis hits, were middle-level jobs. Only 20% of all the new jobs are middle-level jobs. That's never said. We always say, oh, we have growth. So we're going like that. And so I would argue that it's very important to understand that up to 40% of the households, for instance, in many of our countries have gained. And I object to putting all the emphasis on the 1% for one single reason. Number one, we've always had the 1%. Number two, it's when you recognize that it's 40% that you see this materializing of that power, a lot of it fed by absolutely digitized capabilities. But when you take 40%, you're talking about a massive imprint, like a whole operational space with high-income workers, etc., that installs itself in a city. And then you have this reality. So, and out of that comes an irony, I should add, which is that the visual order, we tend to think that the material gives us a sort of a solid version of something. So the material order tells you, oh my God, everything is going so well in our cities. I had the hardest time in New York City persuading some very smart journalists that, yeah, the city looks so much better. I mean, New York was broke before this new epoch starts, because all they could see was better and better and better. And including a lot of sort of nice middle classes, you know, and then when all super fancy. And our states, all, even well-run states like the German state, they're all more indebted. This is another extreme case. You know, this is the United States. I'm just going to say. So we have a whole setup here that accidents can happen. So then back to my starting question, how do complex systems change? How do we even begin to change this? And I who have for years really tried to engage very powerful systems, finance, etc. I now think that number one, very important to know that we do not have to reinvent everything. But what we do need to change is organizing logics. And I thought some of the discussion that we had this morning also touched on that. It's not that the thing in itself needs to be changed, but a lot of how the big digital companies operating, you know, their organizing logics are truly problematic. So vis-a-vis finance, you know, this is one critical element. And in my own practice, I wish I would have had time to talk about that, I have really now become very interested in what is it that we can relocalize. What are the capabilities? We can't relocalize the production of a computer, but we can relocalize a lot. And relocalize means eliminating the franchising, eliminating all that intermediate stuff. Because what marks our current economy that really takes off 30 years ago is intermediation. And when you have intermediation, the intermediaries don't lose. They can create disasters for whoever they are serving. This happens in the world of finance, and this also happens in the world of everyday life. Thank you very much for your attention.
Let's see if you can hear me. I think you can, yeah? All right. So, hi, everyone. Let me just get my timer started so that I don't go over 20 minutes I was promised. All right. So, good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks to Jacob for organizing it. And I'm especially honored that this event is dedicated to Frank Schirmacher, who was a close friend, who probably played a very important role in launching my intellectual career in Germany, if not globally. I think of him as being prophetic on many levels, not just in terms of the digital world, but also in terms of, I think, diagnosing quite correctly the overall malaise of our societies today. And that malaise does not really have to do that much with the digital, but has to do with the very dramatic conflict between democracy on the one hand and capitalism on the other. So in addition to all of the things that Frank has written about the digital, I think his most prophetic contribution was probably his outrage about that famous remark that Chancellor Merkel gave a few years ago about market-conformed democracy. Those of you in Germany who followed that debate probably remember how outraged he was that now democracy has to be in conformance with what the markets demand. And I think in retrospect, that was quite a prophetic critique, and we're seeing the consequences of that stance, that democracy should conform to markets, in things like the referendum that just happened in Italy, where democracy was in fact banned to suit the interest of the market a few years ago, and now we're seeing the results. So what I would like to do today is to try to tie the seams of democracy on the one hand, the state of global capitalism on the other, and the role of the digital as well. So how can we think all three of them together, and what it is that we can learn about the state of global capitalism by looking at it through the prism of modern digital technology. I would argue that for a very long time, if you look at how the dominant narrative around the state of contemporary capitalism has functioned, it has to some degree pitted Wall Street on the one hand as the bad actor against the technology sector in Silicon Valley as the good actor. So you have this kind of classical Hollywood story of the bad cop and the good cop all coming together with a very different set of agendas. So I don't really have the time to go into very profound history here, So I will mostly probably limit myself to sociological observations. But I think historically, and the story that Saskia Sassen has just given you, I'm very much behind it. I think historically you can see that something dramatic happens from late 1960s onwards with the liberalization of the financial sector, whereby the end of the Bretton Woods agreement, the liberalization of capital, the increased globalization of production, the liberalization of global trade results in massive amounts of global financial capital basically seeking a profitable outlet for their investment. In the language of bankers and the financial industry, it's called chasing the yield, right? You would like to get 3, 4, 5% more than the average interest rate would pay you, so you're trying to find the most profitable investment possible. A lot of that, of course, happens because something else happens in the 1970s, and that's the democratization, also people saw at the time, of pension fund financing, right? So suddenly, a lot of people, including Margaret Thatcher, including also people like Peter Drucker, start talking about pension fund capitalism, right? Where the idea is that now that pension funds can actually invest in financial markets, they can actually somehow also make capitalism more responsible, because ultimately the money they invest, the money of the workers, and since that's the case, the workers can actually influence not just their firm, but also what's happening globally, right? So this massive influx of money that you saw in some of these graphs actually comes from rather, initially at least, noble pursuits, right? So it was really the hope that somehow you can civilize and tame capitalism by pouring more and more of our own savings and pension money in it. That leads, I think, and this is, I'm switching more to the sociological mood rather than the historical one, that leads to the emergence of what some economists and sociologists call the FIRE sector in the economy, right? And FIRE sector means finance, insurance, and real estate, right? Which is a sector of the economy that keeps growing and on, right? And you could see it in some of the graphs that Saskia Sassen showed you. If you compare it to other sectors of the economy, the productive sector, many others, you can actually see that the so-called FIRE sector grows disproportionately, and it acquires a pretty important position, right, by the time of the financial crisis. So it occupies a larger chunk of the overall pie. That means not only that there are more and more funds chasing the yield, so to say, right, and that chasing the yield finds many outlets. As you have seen, some of it happens in cities, so a lot of these firms enter cities and start investing in real estate. Some of that happens through infrastructure. A lot of them come and invest in toll roads, airports, water sewers, all in order to produce that promised 5 or 7% return that pensions once want, but no longer can get elsewhere because we are living in an environment of low interest rates. That creates a rather interesting situation where the consequence of the rise of the financial sector are rather dire, in that for those of us on the kind of citizen side, the rise of the financial sector and of the FIRE industry as a whole means that it's also the rise of the rentiers. It's the rise of basically, you know, the old generation of rentiers who we thought productive capitalism was supposed to suppress. Right? If you read Keynes closely enough, he talks about the euthanasia of the rentier, by which he means that, you know, sooner or later, because of, you know, demand management, economic demand management in his case, but also because of productive capitalism in general, we would be able to actually unleash the entrepreneurial potential of the producer and minimize the amount of money and the amount of our own resources that we have to share with people who just happen to control something in a monopolistic-like manner, whether it's money, whether it's land, whether it's real estate, whether it's buildings, whether it's basically basic parts of our everyday infrastructure that we need for social reproduction, right? So the consequence of the rise of the FIRE sector is that more and more of our money, of everyday disposable income, goes to the FIRE sector. If you look at the United States, you can see it very clearly. You can see how much money goes to the providers of healthcare. You can see how much money goes to pay for education. You can see how much money goes to pay the banks. By now, it probably occupies, on average, something about 40–45% of average disposable income, if not more, right? So, and you can see how that actually grows from something like 20% before the emergence of the FIRE sector to something like 45% after, right? So the amount of money available to people shrinks for a very good reason, because the fire sector expands, and we need to pay more and more in monthly rent to them. Right? At the same time, real incomes also fall, for the sole reason that as capital becomes liberalized and internationalized, more and more of it moves elsewhere, especially in terms of its productive capacities. So people basically find themselves without stable jobs that were well-paying and that salaries were actually increasing. That situation is becoming reversed. So a lot of people, both in Europe, but especially in North America, find themselves in a very bizarre situation where more and more of the disposable incomes goes to the fire sector, and they actually have less and less incomes to begin with, because more and more jobs either disappear or move to Southeast Asia, Latin America, and so forth. Right? That, of course, explains why we see this huge populist wave in North America and elsewhere, with a lot of people being justifiably angry about deteriorating living conditions, where more and more of what they used to take for granted is no longer available. Now, that's the kind of story about capitalism decline. On the other hand, what happens is that sometime in the late 1990s, a new industry comes along. That's the digital industry, that's Silicon Valley, right? And that industry, by the looks of it, does not seem to follow the extractive logic of the fire sector. You do not pay any rent to it. It's not like your insurance company, it's not like your real estate agent, it's not like your bank. You do not pay interest to it. You basically don't see it as a drag on the economy. You actually see it very differently. You see it as something that unleashes innovation, that boosts productivity, and, more importantly, that produces a lot of value seemingly for free for a lot of users. We all know that story with Google really well. You get suddenly all sorts of services virtually for free. You get free email, you get free search, you get free cat videos, you get free everything, right? All of that underwritten by advertising. Right? Ultimately, it's a very interesting model whereby the cost of providing many of those services is basically put on the shoulders of the advertising market, with the advertising market basically subsidizing the provision of our information and communication services. Now you can see how, by universalizing that model, you can actually harvest more and more gains from the system. So you can actually offload more and more of these costs, right, on the advertising market. You can see it with Facebook. To some extent, you can see it with many other firms whose entire model is basically offer services in exchange for data, then use that data in order to basically sell advertising, become very rich as a result, exit the scene, everybody is happy. Right? The opposite of Silicon Valley. If Wall Street tries to steal money from you through all sorts of rent extracting activities, Silicon Valley is there to provide a cushion on which you can fall as your incomes are shrinking and more of that money goes to the fire sector. Right? That's the story. In addition to all of that, what also happens from the 1970s onwards is that in America at least, and the story with Germany is very different, a particular attitude towards antitrust emerges, whereby American regulators, under the influence of a lot of neoliberal thinking, which on the subject of antitrust diverges from the liberal tradition in Germany, suddenly decides that you can actually gain quite a lot by granting quasi-monopoly status to a lot of corporations. You can actually harvest a lot of efficiencies from the productive chain. You can also actually generate a lot of value, consumer welfare as they would call it, and you can actually split it around in a way that would also benefit consumers, regardless of whether it actually increases the power of the companies, right? And that gives us something like Walmart. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the extent to which something like antitrust policy in itself becomes an instrument of welfare in America. And what I mean by this is that a company like Walmart is only thinkable within those terms. What does Walmart do in this kind of overall historical narrative that I've just given you of capitalist collapse? It basically allows you to continue buying goods that are getting cheaper and cheaper because of its monopoly status and because of its globalized production and its exploitation of its own supply chain at a time when your incomes are shrinking, right? But you don't see that because the prices at Walmart are falling at a rate that's faster than the rate at which your income is shrinking, right? It's what some economists call the Walmart effect. So basically, you don't notice that they're getting worse off, in part because the goods are becoming cheaper and cheaper, even if your incomes are shrinking, right? The speed at which they're becoming cheaper is greater than the speed at which your income is actually shrinking, right? And I think that actually generates quite a lot of wealth in the United States. Now, you start with that attitude towards Walmart, and you can see how something like Uber is actually seen as an overall contribution to welfare of the consumers, because by leveraging the money that it raises from Goldman Sachs, the government of Saudi Arabia, and all sorts of venture capitalists, Uber is able to offer rides at maybe 30% of the cost, or so they claim, because they basically have so much cash to spend that you would never know what the actual cost is, of the actual taxi company, right? Which creates a situation where Uber can go and approach a lot of American towns and basically tell them, look, guys, you don't have the money to build your own bus system or train system. Why don't you give a little subsidy to us, and we'll build it for you with our own cars? So instead of basically building public transit system, give us a few $1 million in subsidies, and instead of charging your citizen $4 for each ride, we'll just charge them $2, right? And for a lot of cities already in America, from New Jersey to Florida, this is far more acceptable than actually investing into their own public infrastructure, right? Which creates a situation where Silicon Valley and all of these firms do perform a certain welfare function within the American economy, which offsets a lot of the negative effects produced by the FIRE sector, right? I argue that this is unsustainable, that this cannot actually continue in the way in which it has been working, and ultimately, it's a mistake to think of Silicon Valley as a good cop, because it will not remain the good cop forever, right? And I'll unpack what exactly I mean by this. I have 6 minutes left, so let's hope that that happens. Why do I think that that's not realistic to think of Silicon Valley as the kind of good cop? Look at Trump, right? What does Trump want to do with America? Trump understands that a lot of people are frustrated on a purely phenomenological level of living in this rather crumbling world where infrastructure is crumbling, while the people are also not making any cash, right? So he would like to double down on the worst features of the model that has brought America to where it were. So he would like to pour money into infrastructure, but that infrastructure would only mean empowerment of the very same FIRE sector, finance, insurance, and real estate, that he himself represents. Which means that you're going to see more public-private partnerships where basically Americans will have to pay more and more rent in terms of using roads, instead of using airports, in terms of using basically any part of that infrastructure that is going to be built by Trump, right? A lot of the value that will be extracted from that infrastructure will, of course, be done through digital infrastructure, digital sensors, because you actually need to know how much to charge whom, how to exclude people from entering and exiting. You need to be able to basically create ways to exclude people from using it and to find a way to charge them a highly personalizable rate for whatever services they're using. So you're basically going to see the worst excesses of capitalism until now on steroids, right? He represents the FIRE sector. Trump, by any means, is not a rupture with it. At the same time, it leaves him very few options but to continue with the Silicon Valley welfare model, so delegating more and more responsibility to it for basically providing a cushion on which people who are deprived of more and more resources can fall. So you will not see a reversal of the reliance on Silicon Valley. Instead, you'll see a doubling down on it, right? Which creates a situation whereby we're actually looking at something rather sinister, where Silicon Valley itself will increasingly be departing from the good cop model on which it has relied and entering the rentier model. And this, I think, is very key to understand, because ultimately, this model where advertising drives the provision of all the services, it cannot last, because it requires healthy economic growth, and it requires people in China to continue to want to buy BMWs and be able to pay for them. This is not possible because the entire, even the Chinese economy primarily, is overexposed to the FIRE sector. Right? So the moment the global economy slows down, even the Chinese economy slows down by 2%, this advertising cushion that has funded all of it so far will not be there. Right? Silicon Valley is not stupid. It realizes that its own business model is quite vulnerable. It cannot continue in advertising forever. What they have been doing in the last 15, 20 years was something very simple. They've done their best to extract as much data as they could from us, right? And they've done it, supposedly, to improve their ability to sell ads, right? So they do not offer services like, with maps. Like, they would like to know where you are so that they can offer you directions to the public transportation, right? That, however, creates a very bizarre situation where the more data they extract about us, the better their services get, but it also means that the more data they extract from us, the more they're able to teach their own systems of artificial intelligence
to automate things. This is how artificial intelligence works at this point, right? It works through deep learning. We are the nodes in the network that teach the system how to automate things. So the reason why we have self-driving cars is not because we've made some great breakthroughs in artificial intelligence in the last 10 years. The reason why we have self-driving cars is because we've given Google an enormous amount of data, which basically allows them to go and present themselves as the only provider of these services, with a couple of other companies, for which they can start charging. So you can see the old rentier model re-emerging also there, where firms like Google, Microsoft, IBM, Apple, and Facebook, all 5 American firms, are emerging as the data and AI intermediaries on which the rest of society would depend. Right? It means that if you would like to continue running your healthcare system, and because of the crisis of capitalism, conditions of austerity and what have you, you no longer can afford it, your choice is to basically go to Google, give it all the data that you have on your patients, and tell them, well, you know, we really need to understand who's going to fall sick in the next 2 years. Can you do some analysis of the probability that this particular group of people is going to develop kidney disease? And they're going to say, these 200 people are going to develop kidney disease in the next 2 years. We need to inform them and take some action because we'll not actually be able to afford treating them. That's the model in which the British health system already operates, by entering a partnership with Google through its DeepMind artificial intelligence unit. And that's more or less the system on which energy production, health, transportation, and all the other parts of our economy and society will operate. Right? All of it is to say, and I'm wrapping up here, is that the fire industry in this case should actually be expanded, and instead of talking about finance, insurance, and real estate, we should be talking about finance, insurance, real estate, and data, which I think gives that industry a much better name, which is fired, right? Which I think is what's going to happen to most of us, as more and more data is actually transferred to that industry, and more of that data is then used to create the types of AI systems that none of us can control, let alone compete with. There is no government at this point that's able to develop a system as sophisticated as them. So I will stop here. I have a solution, as strange as it might sound, and that's my alarm, which, you know, arrives exactly at the time when I want to talk about the solution. I have a solution which I'll be more than happy to discuss in the debate, but I'll just take 1 more minute to kind of hint at where it's going. I think much of the problem that we have now stems from Europe's lazy assumption that somehow its political and economic well-being can be taken off kind of active deliberative thinking agenda of everyday politics because it always relies that there will be a reasonable person occupying the White House. So European security and economic well-being can more or less be relatively assured. So yes, it's bad that Barack Obama is spying on Chancellor Merkel, but to some extent, you know, Obama is a decent guy whom we can trust. We're entering in a world where the American policy itself becomes so unpredictable, both in terms of security, foreign policy, and the economy and transatlantic relations, that I would argue that that kind of casual, lazy reliance on the good cop sitting in America will be gone. And the moment it's gone, I think the discourse that's going to occupy this place should be that of technological sovereignty. And that would be discourse maybe happening on the local, domestic, national level. Maybe it will be happening at the city level. Let's hope it's going to happen at the European level, even though I have my doubts. But there has to be a counter-agenda that dispenses with this naivete of the post-Cold War kind of settlement, where the default assumption was that whoever it is that's in the White House, we can trust that set of people to be predictable, even though occasionally nasty, as was the case with George Bush. I think that certainty is gone, and I think the sooner Europe adjusts itself to that new situation, the sooner all of us will be better off, secure, and reasonably assured that we are not turning from capitalism, which some of us have doubts about, to some kind of new feudal system where we will actually have to pay more and more rent, not just to the financial, real estate, and banking sector, but also to the technological one. Now, end here. Thank you.
Okay, you take one of those microphones.
Yeah.
Do you want some? Yeah, right? Yeah.
Yes, I'll take one. I'm just going
to get some water.
Beautiful water here.
No problem. I do that for you.
I'm just playing hostess here. Isn't that cute? Yeah. All right.
So now, it's like a bit in a theater here.
At least the water is free for now.
It's in Loriot sketch. What? No, yes, the water, of course, yeah. We try to extract profit from you now. Pay me now. Thank you very much for your insights. I have understood that finance is the driving force of change, and digitalisation, of course, is the condition of this change. But actually, I would really, we're only doing this for half an hour, so don't get bored yet. I really want to talk about democracy, because all day long we circled around this term, and might it not be that we need a new definition of democracy in the digital age? Maybe we have an old understanding of the word.
Well, I think that most liberal democratic systems are in severe decay. I mean, the United States is just one of several. I think that, and when you look at a longer historic trend, no formal system of power, and I mean it in a sense of a regulatory system, etc., has lasted forever. So why should this? In my reading, what begins to really dilute the effectiveness of what we had, say, until the 70s and the 1980s, which was a reasonable proposition and a kind of ironic democracy, because even the nastiest corporation was in the business of mass consumption, so to speak, and wanted the sons and daughters to do better than the parents, because mass consumption was the thing. When the 70s and the 80s come, we're talking the broad West here, that includes parts of Asia, includes parts of Africa, certainly. When the 70s and the 80s come and we privatize and deregulate and de facto globalize in a new mode, because globalization had existed already, that is when the logic of mass consumption doesn't disappear, but it's not the dominant one. And we really shift, I think, to a logic of extraction. So I think also of the Googles of this world, as I mentioned, as extractive. And the expansion of mining and all kinds of things just take off with a vengeance. So at that point, that system that had sort of delivered the goods for a bit really begins to fail. And we have to severely reinvent it. And it cannot just be reinvented from the top. One way of putting it is, what are the material economies that we need to mobilize, that we need to invent, with so many people in poor housing, so many people in highly polluted. There is a lot of work to be done. If one can transform that into economies that work, then we would begin to have sort of a strong ground for a stronger democracy once again.
Well, I don't think we need a new definition of democracy. I just think we need to have a very honest debate about how deep we want that democracy to be. I mean, if you look in a sense, the standard liberal democratic answer, assuming a capitalist economy of the last 50 years has been that you basically want citizens who are not too involved in politics, who are not too involved in self-management, including economic self-management. And if you look at the kind of extreme neoliberal Hayekian vision, you basically want citizens who participate in political affairs through the marketplace, in which now, in the kind of most bizarre American academic political science literature, takes the form of, citizens should vote with their feet, and if they don't like something in their city or their country, they should just leave, and that's sort of the only option that's on the table. I never bought that narrative. I never thought that democracy should basically be limited to participation in the marketplace or in elections every 4 years. I think, ultimately the question of economic democracy, an economic dimension to democracy, where we are talking about questions of ownership,
It will need to be reopened. It will need to be reopened on things like data. It will need to be reopened on things like computing infrastructure, because if it isn't, it's not just that we will not be getting some of the extreme profits that these firms make. And let's be honest, these firms, they are not the General Motors or I don't know, Volkswagens of the previous era. They need at most 2,000–3,000 people to work for them. And they cannot provide the kind of universal welfare that you could expect from General Motors that would employ 500,000 people. So, but it's not just that people will be worse off. It's just that the penetration of the digital intermediaries in all walks of life will affect so many other dimensions of our existence, including things like the media. I mean, so there is all this debate about post-truth and filter bubble and how all of that affects democracy. But ultimately, it's not a self-generating behavior. It's a behavior that is tied to a particular set of choices that we've made. We've made a choice that there will be no funding available for any media. I know we're surrounded by people from the media here, but nonetheless, media will have to compete in a competitive marketplace, so we'll throw them out. And they'll have to basically make money through advertising or subscriptions. And now all of them compete for eyeballs. And they compete for eyeballs by collecting data, putting filters, and that creates the conditions that we live through. It's not a question of technology, it's a question of how you distribute the ownership of the platform.
I reformulate the question. Say that when Angela Merkel said that the markets have to be, that democracy have to be in conformity with the markets, what she basically meant was, or what you could take out of this word was, that if we want to have the efficiency of the markets, we might have to give away a little bit of democracy. You can say the same thing about digitalization. You can say, if you want to have all the gains of the digital world, you have to let go your privacy idea. So, and if you put this choice to the customers or the electorate, which is the same thing basically, they might choose efficiency and improvement in services instead of participation and democracy. So maybe our concept of what we think about privacy and democracy is very old-fashioned. Maybe, maybe you and I and most of us have a very, very old-fashioned notion of democracy, of privacy, of the autonomous self. Maybe we have to change our terms.
Well, I didn't tell you what my model of democracy, in terms of, but I do think I'm a bit of a materialist, maybe a bit too much, huh? And so when I talked briefly about my project of relocalizing, I want us to feel that we're actors, and it doesn't have to be a big playground. I want some systems of recognition. I think we need we have had that on some level, but I would say in the United States, very superficially. I grew up in Latin America. Latin America, a capacity for more depth I saw there, related to deep cultures and the love of culture and I don't know what all, but anyhow, different. But when I say that we need a democracy that enables, did I democracy? No, I said an economy that enables multiple economies. We're really dealing with many economies. We are squashing many and others sort of become dominant. It also means relocalizing. I mean, just to give a very concrete example, it means relocalizing, getting out of franchises. I like the rhetorical question. Do we really need a multinational to get a cup of coffee? I'm talking Starbucks, right? No, we don't. In the United States, most communities have been reduced to they don't feel they can make anything anymore. And so my effort right now within the United States, I'm not the only one, we are a broad network, is how do we begin to relocalize whatever we can relocalize? We can't relocalize the making of the coffee beans, but we can get out of Starbucks, because remember, every franchise takes out some part of the capacity of consumption of a place. Multiply that, multiply that, multiply that, and you get a difference. And so now we're seeing in quite a few parts of the world. For instance, an app that I have designed where I tell the low-income communities, you must know what are the knowledges in your community. Not what their jobs are, but the knowledges. Because in some of these poor communities, you will have doctors who are undocumented, who are working as cleaners. But the community needs to know, we have a doctor. We have a, you know what I mean? So beginning to make people feel that they're present, that they matter. You know, I see it as sort of something that has to come from the base up, because the upper levels are so corrupt, so inward-oriented. But from there, something can, you know, come out of that, given functioning democracies, given that you have an electoral system that more or less can deliver. Now, this holds for particular parts of the world. It doesn't hold for everywhere. We're not talking China. We're not talking some other kinds of countries.
No, but I mean...
I would like to also respond at some point.
Yes, of course.
So, you know, I don't think that this is what Angela Merkel meant, to be honest. It's not a trade-off between efficiency on the one hand and democracy on the other. I mean, it was set in a very particular historical context where one prime minister, in that case Berlusconi, was basically thrown out of office because the bond markets didn't want him to continue. Right? And I think a much better interpretation of what market-confirmed democracy means is what Wolfgang Schäuble said last year with regards to Greece. He said, elections cannot change the rules. I mean, that's a very direct, I think, interpretation of what market-confirmed democracy signifies. And I think, you know, we have to be able to ask that question. And with regards to, you know, what you've said about the trade-offs, you know, part of my answer also in trying to put economic democracy on the table was to show that precisely the language of privacy, for example, is not adequate to account for the profound structural economic change that's happening with automation of production. So yes, if you talk to people by saying that you give your data in exchange to Google, and Google gives you free services, transaction ends, everybody's happy, of course people will accept that. If you push that logical chain one more step and you say, you give data to Google, in the meantime, you train Google how to do things that you know how to do. Because this is what you do every time you make a click somewhere, Google learns how to run that operation automatically. And then you just need to do one more logical chain and say that the more data you give to Google, the higher are the chances your job will go away. And all the spoils and all the profits you would make as a wage earner will then accrue to Eric Schmidt or some shareholder of Google. I think people then would not answer that question without any kind of second thought. And ultimately, I think we have to be able to understand how value is generated in this economy. And we also have to understand that there are limits to locality. I agree on a lot of things with Saskia Sassen, but I think that there are things that cannot be done on a local level.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that.
You know, a local, as I said, you know, in an article that I just published, you know, a local cooperative can have a local company that competes with Uber, as long as you're talking about taxi drivers. A local cooperative cannot build an artificial intelligence system by working even as hard as they want in their garage. I mean, it's not even a matter of building, it's a matter of data, which only Google has right now. Right? So we have to understand that there are big structural issues that has to be tackled on a national level, but ultimately the economic dimension cannot just be discarded away. So let's introduce the economic dimension to debate on privacy and say that it's not just a binary choice, I give my data, I don't give my data, but I give my data and lose my job. Then I think a lot of people will not make that decision.
We see what we call liberal democracy under pressure from two sides. On the one side, we have the digital industrial complex, all these digital enterprises, and the security bureaucracy on an international level. It's not just the US, it's international services that are spying on us. And on the other hand, we have authoritarian regimes, right-wing populism, and in the middle, liberal democracy get kind of crunched, you know, and crumbled from both sides. Is this a coincidence that it's happening now at the same time, or is there a relationship between right-wing populism, Trumpism, Brexiteers, and digitalization? And yeah.
I mean, I can answer. I think yes, that relationship is quite direct. I mean, digitalization amplifies a lot of the trends that were already kind of present in the economy. So the trend towards inequality, I mean, of course, something like Airbnb, to some extent, makes it worse. You know, if you are an asset owner and you have been lucky to buy 10 apartments in the center of Amsterdam or Barcelona, with Airbnb, of course, you can squeeze out far more money
out of those properties by putting them on Airbnb as opposed to renting them long term, because clearly you'll make more money from tourists. So in that sense, of course, you'll gain much more, and people who don't have housing and have not bought an apartment will actually have troubles finding a place and will start blaming somebody, mostly immigrants, for taking their apartments. So in that sense, the rise of right-wing populism does not require much. It just requires a narrative that will kind of leave the economic dimension aside and blame it on some other. And that other, in the case of Brexit, in the case of UKIP and Trump and AfD here, it's the immigrants. It's the populations that kind of play the role that allows them not to talk about themselves. So in the case of Trump, to me, it's actually mind-boggling how somebody who represents the worst form of American capitalism, which is, real estate sector, promises to come and fix capitalism. I mean, if he wants to fix capitalism, he should just resign and retire and not be the real estate, asset holder that he is. Right? And I think it does have a certain appeal, but it has a certain appeal only because of a particular way in which the story is framed by continuously ignoring this large economic dimension.
So continuing with the building platforms for sort of a revival of certain aspects of our democracies rather than throwing the whole thing out of the window. So first I mentioned the relocalizing, right? Because I see that makes people into active subjects, and that produces linkages. They begin to need each other horizontally, that kind of a thing. The second element, the political classes. Our political class, I don't know about you here in Europe, you're still much better off than we are. But beyond Trump, the extreme that is Trump, okay, I don't want to, because that seems like, it's because of Trump. No. We have had trouble with our political classes for the last 30 years. One major issue is that confronted with the growing complexity of more and more sectors, when digitization enters the picture, when finance enters the picture, when telecommunications is not simply the telephone and the big, three major, what have they done? Instead of doing their homework, they have delegated. To whom have they delegated? To the experts. Who are the experts? The people of those same sectors. I mean, this is outrageous. And so whatever the intermediations that make it possible for the political classes to be so shameless in not doing their homework, like children, they should be doing their homework, that has to do with TV, with the entertainment industry, with how so many people in the United States seem to be out to lunch. They simply do not know enough of what's happening in the world and what's happening in their country. So the political classes really need to be held responsible. And I must say, the one thing about the fact that Clinton did not win was that it made visible the arrogance of the political classes. In the case of Trump, it made visible something else, but in the case of Clinton, and that this is just no way. For instance, can I elaborate 1 minute here on something?
Yes, absolutely.
So my image, my fantasy was when the debates would happen, we knew that Trump talks, right? I mean, he's unstoppable. We all followed the call to Taiwan, and then he's tweeting about the Chinese. But anyhow, so here's my image. So there they are, the two standing, right? And Trump goes on and on. Hillary turns to him and says, yes, Mr. Trump, I hear you, but we need to discuss this. Trump goes on and on. Yes, but here's the second issue we must. Imagine if all three debates would have been that way, that she would have laid out one item almost in a sort of mesmerizing mode, Yes, Mr. Trump, but, yes, zero. She spends 20 minutes on a Venezuelan beauty queen. Because what? Now we know the project was, we shame Trump. Hadn't she learned from the Republican campaign that he's not to shame? He doesn't know what shame is, this man, right? So I just found it extraordinary in its arrogance. Then she didn't go to the Rust Belt. Because, those people. Of course she deserved to lose. Did he deserve to win? No. But And the negative part, of course, is that the Republican Party is now thrilled because they have a toughie there, right? It would have been nicer if the Republican Party would have felt it as a hit, as a negative hit, but that hasn't happened. But anyhow, when you look at this level of arrogance in I don't know, I think Germany is much better than the United States there. This is no way to be a political class. And so I'm just hoping we have a few people in there, who are serious people, who are good people, that a kind of reinvention, in other words, briefly put, this was so extreme. It made visible a decay of the last 30 years. This didn't happen just in the last 5 years. This is 30 years of decay. And that out of that can come, so that would be a second level of thing. Out of that come sort of a renovation of the political classes.
But when we talk about reclaiming autonomy, then we must answer the question. I mean, I think that in the goals that we are talking about, everybody could agree. We say, yeah, liberal democracy and autonomy to the self and blah, 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 and so on. But how do we get there? I mean, there's such an accumulation of power in the digital industry, in the financial sector, and in the security bureaucracy. And all those three forces have no interest whatsoever to change this international regime that they have established. Where does the power come from to break it up?
I mean, look, I think here the strategy should really be, I hate to use this word, but it has to be dialectical in that it has to recognize that there are immense potentialities, capabilities, if you want to put it that way, in digital technologies for creating new forms of life and social organization, which will actually emancipate us. You know, we know how that happened even in last century, in the 60s and 70s, the automation of domestic work clearly liberates women. I mean, that's a positive vision. I think there is, none of us are running around blaming, washing machines. I mean, it's a tremendous vision that we do not celebrate often enough, but we have to understand that automation of production, further automation of everyday life, assuming we can figure out the security dimension, data ownership dimension, and all of that, can create entirely new forms of living. You would no longer need to go and work in a factory. You would no longer need to tie yourself to a particular physical location in a way that we do now. And you would actually be able to liberate quite a lot of people from oppressive social ties that they currently have to endure. Now, of course, to make that possible, we have to understand what features of digital technology and various economic models behind it are preventing these new forms of autonomy, sovereignty, self-organization from happening. I would argue that without giving citizens control over infrastructure of self-organization, if you will, which will include sensors, which will include, connectivity, but also the instruments of it, and at this point I would say that data as something that powers immense degree of personalization and something that powers advanced forms of artificial intelligence, has to be something that citizens will have a claim onto. If they don't have a claim over this infrastructure of self-organization and the means of it, which is data and AI, I don't think that that vision would deliver. If we manage to articulate a specific data ownership regime, if we manage to articulate how some of the infrastructure that now is only operated by companies can be operated by cities, and it's not like I'm proposing some kind of crazy anti-capitalist revolution here. A lot of our cities, including in Germany, have realized that water can be run on a municipal level, electricity can be run differently, energy can be run differently, gas can be run differently. Why can we not run transport differently outside of Uber? Why cannot we run Airbnb on a local platform run by the city? All of them can be done.
Saying revolution, you just wrote an article in The Guardian stating the thesis that you propose to nationalize or collectivize, I don't know how to say that, data. To take it away from the big five, from the firms, and make them pay for it when they want to use it. This is nationalization. This is like in South America in the 60s or something.
I didn't say nationalize. That term is not there. But again, I do not see, why not?
Give it to the people. What does it mean then? Who should own it? Like in Switzerland, what we heard here this morning, where they have a Genossenschaft. I don't know how to translate that in English. I think it's a very, very German term, Genossenschaft.
You're not going to have a one-size-fits-all solution for data. There is a lot of data we produce on an everyday basis as we interact with each other in the built environment that, to me, should belong to the city. I do not know why I should claim ownership of a data that I produce as I walk from point A to point B in the city. Right now, the model according to which the smart city is developing, the data will belong to Cisco, Google, and whoever else runs your smart lighting or your smart road.
I don't see, like, how is it nationalization? Like, to say that that's nationalization already presupposes that these firms that receive funding from us, I mean, go and investigate the business models. The reason why Cisco can operate in cities like Barcelona is because they get a lot of public funding. They get a lot of public funding, they build all that infrastructure, and then they claim that the data is yours. By what logic is it reasonable? Like, I don't think it's reasonable. It's as unreasonable as having these big giant publishers who are publishing articles funded by taxpayers' money and then charging $500 for accessing an article, which I paid for out of my taxes. I think it's a ridiculous model that is feudal and not capitalist in it. It's based around rent. And no, I'm more than happy to reclaim that infrastructure. I see no reason why it should be owned by them. Again, it's infrastructure which they can use, they can pay some tax for it, they can pay a fee for it, and they can pursue their free market model all the way they like. Why should they own the infrastructure? Like, by this logic, Cisco will own all the air we breathe in 10 years, and we'll have to pay them a fee because they were the ones who built the sensors. Then we'll be renationalizing air. I mean, yes, you can frame it that way. I think we shouldn't even accept the terminology.
Yeah. No, I agree with a lot of that. I think that those firms are really grabbing, they're crawling. And the stuff that I just mentioned in passing about the buying of property, what is happening there is a different kind of crawling. It's crawling into the law, of urban land, which is an old law, so not very formalized. And the new contracts of all those big buyers of properties that are standing mostly empty, and they are beginning to crawl into that domain. So what they want is to own the urban land, not just the building on top of it. There is a lot of that kind of crawling, and what you described, I completely agree with that. They are just taking over all kinds of things that they should not be owning. But I wanted to get to my third point, which relates to the digital. And here, I think that, just to give you one little example of how one could turn the tables around. So right now, the experience in the United States and some other countries that I'm familiar with, I don't know about Germany, how it works. The big tech companies come to visit the governor of the city or the mayor or whatever and say, here's what you can do. We can sell you this, and here, I don't need to elaborate yet, you get the picture. So governments often buy all kinds of stuff that they don't need. So I'd say we turn that around. So when a government, a city mayor organizes his team to say, what are our problems? And problems where we might just be able to have a digital solution, but we don't know what it is. So they have a very clear sense of what their challenges are and what could possibly be used. Then they invite the tech sector. And the first question is, how can you help us with this list of problems? Now, that is a minor, turnaround in who says what and who asks what, but it could make all the difference, because it also means that the government employees need to study. They need to know each square inch of their city, so to say, right? So that a kind of knowledge space begins to enter the picture. So that's one element. Second element that I'm sort of very interested in is a notion that I call, like that, open sourcing the neighborhood. The notion that every neighborhood has a kind of knowledge about the city. I don't know how that would work nationally, but the city, is this very particular kind of space. So they have knowledge about something in the city that probably the experts in the central government administration do not have. And to me, and so how could you sort of enable every community to have access to some sort of open source situation where they can transfer that knowledge? Now, that is just a little step for a far more complex system than communicating with the government or what it is. It is a way of people to feel that they can make a difference, etc., like the famous, what is it called when you have the holes? The pothole app. Do you know what I'm talking about? So in cities that have a lot of snow, when it smells, you always have holes in the streets. A challenge for any municipal government to figure out where they are. So the municipal government of Boston originated a little app that you're maybe on a bike, you may be walking, or you may be in a car. When you hit a pothole, or you see when you click, that goes straight to central government in Boston. Now, that is a minor little thing, very helpful for central government, but it has had the effect of generating other chains of communicating with city government, of people feeling that they matter, people being interested whether there are other apps that we could develop. So these are all ways in which the digital exits its own fancy domain and becomes actually an instrumentality at the level of people. And to me, these are all beginnings of trajectories, and they can be slow trajectories or pretty fast trajectories. Third element is, what are really the new systems, complex digital systems, that we the people, and again, for me the most practical variation is a city, because there you have very concrete things, that we actually need. We as citizens, we as residents, we should know this. I think academics have a luxury situation in the United States. They have a lot of data, they know exactly, etc. There should be some platform where this becomes a public event. This is what we need, in the city. And then find out what is being made. And in my situation, we have more and more doctoral students who are brilliant at all of this, who are making very interesting innovations, some small and some big, that can eventually work. I am now working on a list of about 20, support open society, etc. And this stuff, it's so little, but it activates much more than the thing itself. So to me, that is a kind of a politics of our present also, that people have these possibilities, because the content of politics is something that we have not discussed here. What is the political? And I think the political has been reconstituted in a very serious way. Our political classes don't talk about that, but I think it has been reconstituted.
So this then ends with a rather optimistic stand. I hear that. Maybe we make some like 5 to 10 minutes with questions before Gerhard Baum gives his final statement. Are there any questions from the audience? No.
Let's just go to the
I see no questions.
I'm ready for final statement and drinks. How's that?
Am I too... Is there just a light blinding me? No, there are no questions.
Can I make a comment on what
please
Saskia said? I also return to your question, which is still in my mind, about that it's some kind of nationalization. I think we have to understand that if you read the prophets of capitalism, if you read Adam Smith, if you read David Ricardo, they are very clear-eyed and very sharp when they talk about rent. They understand that certain resources constitute rent. So, and rent, I don't mean, stuff you pay for your apartment, but we're talking about resources that are key to economic and social activity. And once somebody establishes a monopoly-like control over them, then they can extract money. And to quote John Stuart Mill, by no means a communist, you can make money in your sleep. That's a quote from John Stuart Mill, right? So at this point, it's not just land, it's not just real estate, and it's not just money that generate this rent-like monopolies, it's also data. And I think to me it's obvious, and it kind of shows you how backward even thought within capitalist camp has gone, that it's no longer possible to actually point to rent-generating activities and say that this is rent. And any productive capitalist that really wants to have the Schumpeterian disruption would want to remove that rent-like seeking capability in order to innovate. I think that the kind of rhetoric of disruption and constant innovation that companies like Google and Facebook throw at us with this constant glorification of hackathons, it's nonsense. You cannot take on Google in your garage. You can die in your garage working on this idea for 50 years. You'll never be able to beat them, because at this point, it's not your ability to master algorithms or come up with a new kind of model that makes any difference. It's your ability to aggregate the data, which Google has been aggregating for 15 years. It's like thinking that you can go on and take on the largest real estate investor in Berlin by having a 3D printer which will help you print out houses. It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because they already control so much. And that adds to the ability to expand, expand, and expand.
Yeah, but at the same time, yeah, of course they are that way. And that is why, listen, I look at finance, which is a pretty powerful, so the one thing about finance, I think I mentioned in passing, it brings itself down. Like right now, it's on a downward curve. What comes next, we don't know. But in the meantime, there are millions. Every city has far more poor people than it does have these rich elites. And I want to activate them, and there are, Latin America is also very full of many brilliant little interventions. These are small interventions, and they are things that everybody can do. These apps, they are simple applications.
Sure, but Saskia, let's not
get
too caught up in the apps. The app in Boston that you mentioned, it actually creates an inequality of its own, because the only potholes that are being reported are reported in parts of the city where people can afford smartphones. Like, we know it really well. There are poor parts of Boston where people don't carry smartphones, don't install apps, where their potholes are not being fixed. All these apps, they do not offer structural solutions to the problems.
They do not offer structural solutions, but they mobilize people. And I know that some of the low-income communities have activists who are making sure that the people are aware. It's a question of mobilizing, rather than people being passive victims, beginning to mobilize. And they will make their own histories. We cannot say what they should be doing, etc. In one of my books, I asked myself the question, do the poor, do the powerless actually make histories? They do, but it takes them a very long time. You see, and all I am seeing right now is millions in all our cities in the United States, millions of people who are simply out of it, and they have become passive victims. And how do you get them out of that? Because in the end, it's also going to depend on those millions. It's not only going to be, how we stop the Googles, because the Googles are, frankly, at this point, quite unstoppable, certainly with the instruments that we have right now. So, yes.
Okay, there's one question. Yeah, why not? Please, go ahead. Is there a microphone?
So, it's not a question, actually. I wanted to add something to this Google thing, and just I keep the last phrase you said. Google cannot be stopped. I think, I don't know, there's one person who became Google creative director just 2 years ago, Ray Kurzweil. Does somebody know the name here?
Sure.
Okay, I think this person, he has invented the synthesizer and very beautiful inventions in music, but he's even working on, really this is not science fiction, on the project to make bio-nanotechnologic devices to guide mankind, like to get really the cyborg living, like not more the human being, but something in between the human being and the electronical device, microchip controlled, etc. So I think this is a projection of future. For me, is horrifying. I'm European, I'm not American. So I don't know, maybe we could speak about the possibility, the Euro possibility to stop these kinds of actions inside Europe. I don't know if this makes sense, but I saw now while sitting here, I Googled Ray Kurzweil, and you can do so. He's now into a project of making apps for children to play with biotechnological devices and so on. So they are just taking the issue you said, that people are not passive, but they make them play with these things. And I don't know how the rules of these apps are, but as we can imagine, we make the big click, yes, user, I agree. And so all the inventions these kids make go to Google or to the company who is working in this case for Google.
Thank you.
And that is why I want endogeneity a bit. That is why I insist on this, not because it is the revolution, but because there are multiple ideas, especially when you have a big city with very, very diverse populations. There are some people who are very, very bright and very brilliant. Sort of an endogenous capability that most communities used to have. This was not something, and they are just simply losing it now. They're just passive consumers of everything, if they can consume. But the risk that you described, they are just multiplying and expanding. There really is capture of imaginations, there is quite a bit of evidence on that.
Well, look, I think we have to understand that the problem here is not so much some kind of split between Europe and America. It's mostly actually the split between Europe and a particular region of America, which is California, which has a very positivistic, if you want to put it that way, view on life, right? Where the attitude is supposed to be very cheerful, happy, as long as you're into yogurt, startups, and yoga, you'll be a happy person, right? And I think Europe works very differently, and certainly Germany. I don't think California would produce Adorno, right? Even though he did spend some unhappy years there.
Produce what?
Adorno. Theodor Adorno.
You know, I'm not making a joke, but actually, I do think that there is a lot to be said for the power of anger, which Europe still can generate. That's why I'm so kind of unhappy with Saskia promoting all these apps, because, I mean, their purpose, by and large, is one. It's to make sure that things work. You know, and that's why all of the smart city buzz now revolves around the idea of the happy city. Right? Who are the cities that would like to be the models of the happy city in the universe? They're Singapore and they're Dubai. Those are the two cities that have invested billions into putting sensors everywhere so that their citizens are happy. Right? How do you make citizens happy? You make sure that you collect enough data about them and you create the right kind of cybernetic infrastructures to make sure that they feel well. So, you know, once they hit a pothole, you immediately dispatch a drone to fix the pothole so tomorrow you don't encounter it. Like, for me, it's a very horrible model of politics where no collective action ever takes place. Because then all you need to do is to create some kind of an auction where, you know, like you identify the pothole, the system identifies, you know, you are unhappy by a factor of 5, so it asks you, do you want to pay 20 cents to fix that pothole through a drone tomorrow? You say yes, you are happy, the pothole is fixed, and there is no politics. Right? And for me, this is a very kind of ugly development whereby, you know, the kind of anger that actually leads to collective action, where people start talking and discussing their frustrations, and they start realizing that, you know, I have a problem in my neighborhood, you have a problem in my neighborhood, maybe we can pull forces together, go to a meeting and have an actual political action. All of that disappears into this kind of surveillance-heavy model of fixing things on the spot.
Last intervention by Saskia Sassen, then we go on.
I agree with everything you said, except the fact the apps that I'm talking about, they're developed by those people. They're learning how to do it. And you know what? They're helping them organize. So it is precisely that. It is precisely people who are suffering enough that they have said, enough of this, I'm not going to wait. So, and moreover, you know, the people that you described, like Dubai, you know, these are people that nobody's interested in, you know when I'm talking about low-income neighborhoods in New York City. So it's endogenous. And the best, the most interesting thing is, it is about what they need. And what they need is quite different from us, the middle classes, from the scientists, you know, from the professionals. And so it's an endogenous condition. And that makes me think that, and so I've dealt also with, in Brazil, you know, against the forest, their needs. It's not what they're buying, it's what they're making. And that is why they're very simple. But I have a long list, and they're really quite beautiful. And they make tissue. They connect the poor mother who has trouble with her kids and the teacher, not the administration of the school. So they create solidarities. And of course, New York is full of immigrants, and some of those immigrants are brilliant. You know how that is, right? So there are probably enablers like that. But this is totally localized. This has nothing to do with big corporations saying, and so what you described for the children is rather alarming, you know. Anyhow, that's it.
Okay, thank you for this. Thank you for being with us. And now, Gerhard Baum, and then we stop. Thank you.